Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you, Brother Chris Ludke.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to explore the Chamber of Reflection. Now, before I get into it, I want to acknowledge the fact that the Chamber of Reflection is not generally considered part of ritual in the jurisdiction of Wisconsin. We don't use it. In fact, it has been banned in many forms and at various times. And it appears nowhere in the ritual book. It does, however, appear elsewhere. And what I want to get into is the history, the idea behind it, and really what its function would have been, when it may have occurred, and why it could be a useful tool today, even if not in the lodge, rather as something that we consider. Now, before getting into the Chamber of Reflection, I am reminded of a conversation that I have with my students every semester. I teach a class on art appreciation, and when I do so, we talk about one artist by the name of Mark Rothko. He paints these massive paintings. They're huge for a reason. They're meant to take up all of your peripheral vision. They're meant to be seen in a silent room, and really they're just clouds of color. Best way I can think of to describe them. There is no symbolism. There is no imagery. There is only color. And yet people break down in tears in front of them. What's going on? It's that they have entered sensory deprivation. There's nothing to hear. You're in a silent gallery. There's nothing else to see. The painting takes up your peripheral vision. There's nothing to feel. It's a painting. You're not allowed to touch it. And please don't taste the painting. So what's happening is people are left to look at solely their train of thought. That constant train that many of us have running through our head, and the same one that causes us, when we go back to our homes, when we go back to our dorm rooms, wherever the situation is, to immediately upon entering the house, entering the apartment, we turn on the TV or the stereo or talk to people. But the one thing we don't do, and many people are very uncomfortable with today, is the idea of sitting alone with that train of thought. And yet that's exactly what Rothko does. He forces you to be alone with your train of thought. And so when people break down, it's not because of anything in the painting. It's that the painting is acting as a mirror, focusing you on your own thoughts. And that's really the idea behind the Chamber of Reflection. Now today, the Chamber of Reflection is only really found in some Masonic rites. And it's typically going to be a small room in which a candidate is left on his own prior to some form of initiation. It is one of Freemasonry's more alluring, more thought-provoking, and truly esoteric ideas. Now, in some jurisdictions, or some degrees, some rites, the Chamber of Reflection is the starting point for people going on a journey. Now, in Blue Lodge, the Chamber of Reflection has at times been used, for example, before the entered apprentice, which makes sense. Because the idea is that before you enter into this journey, you have to go into a symbolic and dramatic realm of Freemasonry. And we need this sort of transition from the secular to the sacred, as it were. I'm just borrowing a term, not that Freemasonry is sacred, but you get the idea. It's a kind of twilight in which the candidate may turn back if he chooses, but from which he will forever be changed. Even if he chooses, or in some instances fails to progress through the rest of the degrees, he'll be changed by his experiences in this one room, which, much like the Rothko paintings, forces him to reflect upon his reason for wishing to become a Mason, as such, for all his actions in life. This all may become more apparent when I describe the room. Typically, you would see a single candle placed on a table with a pen and paper. The candle is the only thing that lights this chamber of reflection. The table would be adorned typically with a human skull, in other words, a memento mori, some bones, maybe a lump of bread, a flask of water to provide sustenance, an hourglass, again, memento mori, a mirror, referring to the fact that we need to look inside ourselves. It's the same reason Shinto uses mirrors in Japan, and the same reason that I was talking about the Rothko paintings as a mirror into our deeper thoughts. You also might find other things, a saucer containing salt and another containing sulfur, although not always. On the walls, murals are painted typically in white on the black background. You might see, for example, a cockerel with the words vigilance and perseverance written beneath it. The cockerel being a symbol of carpe diem, of seize the day, of a new start, of a reset. The reset we see in the morning. We might see a scythe. We might see a sign that reads VITRIOL, which is an ancient acronym that commands one to examine oneself. Know thyself. The purpose of this room is to cause the candidate to indulge in those serious meditations, which the room's somber appearance and gloomy emblems with which it is furnished are calculated to produce. The symbols derive, well, in many cases from the ancient world, ancient philosophy. You could look at the Stoics, you could look at Socrates, you could look at the Epicureans and see similar ideas. But other symbols, such as the cockerel, comes to us from alchemy, which has provided us with many symbols we use today that are associated with metamorphosis, with change. Remember, alchemy is all about change. Alchemy is all about perfecting the human soul. The lead into gold is, of course, a metaphor for purification and self-improvement. After seclusion, the initiate is requested to write his moral and philosophical testament, sometimes to be read later in lodge. In some cases, they might be asked simply to write their thoughts. And it would be something that might be saved and given back to them at a later degree so that they can reflect on where they were, how far they've come, their changes, the changes that have taken place by learning our lessons, our secrets. It is only in solitude that we can really reflect on our present or future undertakings, and a man who has undertaken a thing after mature reflection seldom turns back. Incidentally, this is also why oftentimes lodges will delay giving out a petition to make sure that that person has had time to reflect on the decision they're making. Now, this isolation, originally in a cave or hut, going back to the classical world, the ancient world, the hermits, the Irish monks, the anchorites, all would have had a similar idea. Alone with your thoughts and a pen and paper, or simply alone with your thoughts in the case of the biblical and New Testament, and just after the New Testament, religious hermits that we see in the Levant, in the Eastern Mediterranean, such as Saint Simon of Syria-Skete, who lived on a column to show his willingness to be alone with his thoughts and his ideas. But this isolation is the beginning of a ritualistic or symbolic metamorphosis, allowing us to start to hatch from whatever cocoon we believe we lived in. And the initiate comes out of the dark a new person. This custom is normal with many cultures, and in places where there are initiation rites, this would be traditional, going back to the mysteries of Eleusis, going back to many of the old mystery schools. They would have had very similar ideas. This causes the initiate to consider such notions of symbolism that are rich in the metaphors of life, death, transition, rapture. Of course, today we have moved from these caves or huts into those lodges that use this in their ritual. This symbolic journey is a trial and proof of earth for Masons today. The noted symbols focus the mind on the essence of life and seek to free him from the phantoms that establish light and darkness in opposition. It's to help begin to teach them, much like the Mosaic pavement, that the idea of good and evil, the idea of black and white, are artificial constructs that we apply to the world to simplify our understanding. And yet, well, as I've said before, good and evil is kind of a tricky concept because very few people are truly evil. In fact, the line between good and evil runs through the hearts of all men. It's really a matter of perspective oftentimes. But this initial trial and proof of earth, of the material world, proof of the reality, the truth, indicates the journey forward. Symbolism shows how words create images, and these images end up in myths and various tales of truth, which have a bit of truth but pass on winding paths leading from desires to ideas. The Chamber of Reflection is a place where exploration of these paths begins. It's not a place for all of them. And I would argue that the Chamber of Reflection is very much Masonic meditation. Not all that different from what we see in Eastern philosophies or many forms of Western religion. They're there to show the initiate that certain symbols should raise vital questions, and then submitting the answers to pen and paper. It causes him to learn that one must search within oneself, as the truth is hidden there. And this truth is the real solution to our problems. Even without going beyond the scope of the Chamber of Reflection and presenting the rest of the first degree, it's possible to imagine what impression this initial part of the ritual would make on a candidate being ushered into our honorable institution. The Chamber of Reflection teaches powerful lessons. True initiation is an individual, internal process. It's not about entering the room. It's about what happens beforehand. In fact, we even refer to it in the first degree when we say you were first prepared to be made a Mason in your heart. That is internal development. That is meditation. That takes reflection. So even though we don't use the Chamber of Reflection, at least not in Wisconsin today, it is still present. Really, the shadows of it are still present in our modern teachings. The Chamber of Reflection, a number of different ideas. The idea that no one can transform a man but himself. We cannot change others. Others have to do that. Others may guide and help, but ultimately, the individual alone is the only one who can perform the great work. And the Chamber of Reflection epitomizes this process. Not only does it remind us to seize the day, not only does it remind us that we're here for a short time and we need to use that time as wisely as possible, but it gives us time to consider the journey we're about to partake in. Think about where we've been, how we got here, and where we hope to go in the future. This form of Masonic meditation is still there and still useful, even if it isn't in a darkened room. But I would say it is definitely the sort of thing that you should explore. Try to understand and see the usefulness of it, even if we don't actually use it. Because it can give us yet another hint about what Masonry has been and what we can take from it. Thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Leakey, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.